see how this will be looked at from legislators. Another totally different sector which I found interesting, and it's not totally surprising, is the question, can you actually, and how, if you need to, identify a legal person. Now this can be done, so I'm not going to repeat what was already said before, what Ken said. There are different ways of doing it. Sometimes you want to do it, sometimes you even don't want to do it. So there are different ways of identifying a legal personality. But the question behind, of course, is you have very established data protection laws. And these data protection laws differ. They differ from country to country. They're uniform to some degree in the European Union, but they're not identical. So even the new data protection framework is not going to be 100% identical. But it's going to be different in the United States. But the data you exchange is not data which you only exchange within a national or a regional territory, but you exchange it on a global scale typically. So can you identify this? Because for each piece of information there might be a different legal environment attached to it. So how can this be done? This is what legislators are asking in the moment. Plus you have some very, in many fields, you have what is called, at least between many countries, you have bilateral agreements how you are allowed to exchange personal data. And they are captured in bilateral agreements. In Europe, they're called the Privacy Shield agreement, and they're not just between Europe and the US, but they're between Europe and many other countries. Now, you have to ensure that this legal environment will be protected in this new environment as well. The question is, how do you do it? Sometimes it will be easy. In a more complex legal environment, it will be much harder to always identify this. One very tricky question somebody came up with, which I haven't thought about. This is the question, how can you deal, this is a very specific European law, and you all will remember this. How can you deal in this environment with the so-called right to be forgotten? So if you have as an individual want to have your information deleted in course and you can argue the case. It's not just you can have everything deleted, you have to argue the case. But if it's a justifiable case, how will this be then treated in this environment? So this just gives you a little bit of flavor what will come up in these debates and these discussions. Then another topic which I tested and spoke to some of our colleagues, which are more in sector-specific environments. They said what we are planning to do and looking into some of them. For example, how will sector-specific regulation which exists, topic-specific regulation, also take for example the data privacy, data protection environment, and a sector, airline sector or whatever you take, which is already super complicated now. And how will this be reflected in such a blockchain environment? Let's assume they want to implement this. How will this be reflected in such an environment? So these are the questions people came up with and asked, and some are already underway, so some are doing early phase of investigation. Some might come with a communication one day, maybe during this year or next year. So you can see there are topics coming up which will need an answer. For technical people, it might be easy to give an answer, but you always have to imagine the political world is not automatically neither deeply connected to the technical environment, not always deeply connected to sector-specific environment, but they worry more about issues which have a more general concerns. So my point would be, whenever you want to plan to do something, look into this as early as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, the right to be forgotten is an interesting thing.
It's a very interesting one.
It was so far a very European thing, but earlier this week, I think it's reached DC, and I can't remember exactly. It's just from something I read, but there are a couple of senators or congressmen that are putting forward a proposal that this would also be implemented in the States. Now, it's interesting because, of course, blockchain does exactly the opposite. You've got the register and you just pile more things on it. What if you have to start now taking things out of the blockchain because of that right to be forgotten?
You might not want to take it out. You might just notify it and then just keep it in the dark.
So it doesn't get...
And so it doesn't get, exactly, that's what you typically would do.
Yeah.
Is there a country that you would say that is doing the best, like, legal structure and best planning for all the blockchain technology?
I think probably China, what I see. Maybe Denmark, because you mentioned this before, that you have some, but I haven't looked into the Danish case. I'm planning to go to China this year to understand this better, because they seem to be very far advanced in this environment, but they will probably go for different models. They're much more interested in, for example, having the legal persona and the real name always attached to a real person. So at least in a banking environment and wherever you have financial transactions.
Because it seems that many of the problems are like replicable in many countries. Same things, identities, notaries, things that land records, etc. And it would be ideal if there was like a framework that was like at least community approved, to be like, okay, so this works and this is something interesting to base your...
You know, there are two interesting approaches. So I've been too long in politics to believe that you can find internationally agreeable solutions. This typically never works. You work very long and the outcome is very poor. And in a political climate like we have right now, where the opposite is true, you have more renationalization efforts, despite being, a global operator. So I would be a bit more cautious, but I looked into one issue, which I was very familiar with, which is called mutual recognition agreements, which are fascinating because they allow you to have different standards, but the certification of the difference of standards would certify that you are practically on an equivalent level. So for car crash, for example, this is important. For all in these kind of technical environment where you can prove, where you have real proof, you can do this. And this would be super fascinating to put on blockchain, because you would have more trust. Because all the little pieces of this, the standard setting, which you do, and the certification processes, which are in a moment very complicated, and to compare and to build the trust between, car crash in the United States or car crashes somewhere else. It's a very complex environment, and you have many business interests involved as well. So this, I think, would be a good example, and maybe an example one could take to other sectors as well then in the future. So instead of looking for one single uniform systems, accepting the differences, but making the differences visible and building the trust into the differences. Yeah.
There is a special technology in the works at the moment where you are building your identity based on everything you have done in your life that you are able to upload. Yeah? And of course, that technology, I see it the way that will allow the established society to register in on blockchain. But everybody, like the unbanked people, the 2 billion unbanked, once again, it will be the established society which will be shown, known, and so I love it, but in the same time I'm thinking, some have a choice, they don't want to be known, but in reality there's also others who actually don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So, and that is a big amount. Just look at India and the caste system still existing, in some ways, it tells it all, that there is an amount of people out there who will never be heard. And Who is looking out for them?
And this leads to another question which is debated. Who is the owner of the data? Because you could turn in a blockchain environment, you could easily turn the ownership around, and you could make each individual practically the owner of his her data for all wherever data is distributed. Some are even thinking you can then reverse it and can practically attach, little bits of pieces of money to it each time.
Yes, this would be a reputation-based
Yeah.
ecosystem, where
Exactly.
you are rewarded
You
money
reward it for
uploading details. Not your name, nothing to do with your name, but actually build your person by activities you've done. And that would be unique in the end, of course, for those people participating. And that is actually already, there are people in Seattle who've been working 15 years now on this, and they're ready. Hopefully with our crowdfunding part to actually make it happen.
You had one?
If you're interested in China, check out the folks at Alibaba,
Oh yeah,
because they're cooking something on
I
that.
have them on my list.
Yes.
Yeah, number one. Yeah, absolutely.
They're very far forward already.
Yeah. China in general and these kind of technologies, really excellent.
They're
investing.
related with the government, and
Yeah.
they've got a plan, 10-year plan that does involve, I would think the only technology or a technology that would help them achieve what they want to achieve would be the blockchain.
Yeah. Okay. Ken,
Okay.
take over the
Okay,
ship.
Simon. We're now going to hear from Chainalysis, which is